The pervert's laughter ricocheted off the marble and gold surfaces. Champagne exploded across pristine white fabric in a deliberate, vicious act, and the entire room seemed to collectively swallow a gasp. "Girls like you should know better," Charles Tucker purred, his fist still clutching her torn sleeve, his eyes gleaming with the perverse thrill of public humiliation. Manhattan's elite watched from their carefully appointed tables, like Romans observing a spectacle in the Colosseum. But near the grand marble staircase, a man dressed in black stood motionless, radiating an unhurried, lethal aura. It was the stranger Nova had once saved from bleeding to death in a dark alley. And the look blazing in Salvador Pomo's eyes promised that Tucker had just signed something far worse than a simple death warrant. The penthouse suite on the 68th floor was meticulously designed to make even gods feel insignificant. Light cascaded from crystal chandeliers like frozen rain, and every surface shimmered with the unmistakable arrogance of wealth. Nova Harris navigated through this opulent space like a ghost, seen but essentially invisible. 25 years old, a second-year medical student, she was expertly juggling two drastically different lives. The exacting precision of anatomy labs by day and the humbling labor of carrying heavy silver trays by night. She'd reluctantly taken this catering job to bridge the $3,000 gap that her scholarship couldn't quite cover. Her mother had already sacrificed far too much for her dreams. Pride wouldn't allow Nova to ask for more, so she donned the unflattering uniform, forced a smile through waves of condescension, and pretended the stinging humiliation of snapping fingers didn't wound her. Then, Tucker arrived, charming on the surface, but a predatory beast in practice, a man who wore his wealth like impenetrable armor and reveled in cruelty as a mere sport. He'd cornered her twice already that evening, each unwanted advance more entitled and presumptuous than the last. By the third encounter, near the imposing grand staircase, his smooth voice had turned menacingly venomous. "You think serving drinks makes you equal to us? Let me educate you." He seized her wrist in a painful grip. Champagne spilled like liquid gold. The orchestra faltered, its music abruptly cut short mid-phrase, followed by the distinct sound of tearing fabric. The entire crowd froze in place as Tucker laughed cruelly and emptied what remained of his champagne bottle directly onto her chest. Nova didn't scream. She wouldn't allow herself to. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, a guiding principle. Asterisk, when they try to break you, baby girl, you breathe. You stand, then you win. Asterisk, so she stood there, in her torn uniform, the champagne chilling against her skin, her spine ramrod straight, her eyes locked onto Tucker's with a quiet, icy defiance. And that was the exact moment she saw him. Salvador Pomo, older than she remembered him, with sharper edges around his eyes, the very man whose life she had once saved in a rain-soaked alley, stitching his side wound while distant sirens screamed in the night. His very presence now was a dark, unspoken promise of retribution. Within mere minutes, the atmosphere of the gala transformed from luxurious indulgence to utter chaos. One quiet step, one softly spoken word from Salvador, and suddenly the predator became the prey. Tucker's cruel laughter curdled into a sound of confused panic. Then came the gunshot, loud, merciless, and utterly final. Glass shattered and people screamed in terror. Salvador immediately draped his jacket over Nova's shoulders, whispering words that would irrevocably alter the course of her life. "I tried to stay away from you, Angel. I really did, but they keep trying to touch what's mine." That night should have ended there. Police sirens wailing, a scandalous scene, blaring headlines in the morning papers. But for Nova, it was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. She desperately wanted to disappear, to simply finish her shift, change out of the ruined uniform, and pretend that none of this had ever happened. But the city had teeth, and men like Tucker didn't suffer bruises quietly. By dawn, every news outlet in the city was plastered with the story. Asterisk, Aries assaulted at charity gala. Pomo enforcer fires gun in defense. Asterisk, her face, blurred to protect her identity, was on every screen, her name whispered in hushed tones through the corridors of power. The university summoned her for an immediate discussion. Her job suspended her without pay, pending further notice. In a mere 24 hours, she'd lost her scholarship, her only source of income, and her precious anonymity. Then came the sleek black car. Salvador's driver waited silently outside her apartment building, the engine idling softly. A plain white letter lay on her doorstep, bearing no signature, just her name and a single line written in precise, elegant handwriting. Asterisk, you're not safe here. Come quietly. Inside, her small studio apartment appeared undisturbed, except for the ominous red laser dancing menacingly across the far wall. Nova didn't hesitate to think. She grabbed her bag, her medical kit, and the framed photograph of her father, and walked out to the waiting car. The ride was silent except for the low hum of the city all around them. Salvador sat opposite her, his dark suit impeccable, his face unreadable. You shouldn't have come, she said finally, breaking the silence. You shouldn't have been hurt, he replied, his voice low and unwavering. Now we fixed that. I don't need fixing. His eyes softened slightly. No, you need protection. Nova turned to gaze out the window, consciously refusing the way his intense gaze pressed a sudden warmth against the persistent chill of her fear. Protection from what? From you? He didn't answer her question, simply signaled to the driver. The city lights blurred into an indistinguishable mass of color, and when the car finally stopped, she realized they had entered a private elevator. Pomo Holdings, read the simple plaque beside the mirrored doors. The elevator opened onto an entirely different world. Dark, richly polished wood, an atmosphere of quiet power, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the entire Manhattan skyline. You live here? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I rule from here, he corrected softly, his gaze never leaving hers. He gestured towards a lavish suite that felt more like a heavily guarded fortress. Monitors, guards, locked steel doors cleverly disguised as art. This isn't protection, she murmured, the realization dawning on her. It's control. Salvador looked away, his expression unreadable. Sometimes, they're the same thing. He left her with a luxurious room, a closet full of new clothes, and a heavy silence that settled around her. But that silence was filled with unspoken questions she didn't dare voice aloud. Asterisk, why her? Why now? Asterisk, and why, despite everything that had happened, did safety feel so much like danger when he was near? The next evening, Nova found him in the study, staring intently at a framed photograph of her father. You knew him, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. He saved my father's life once, Salvador replied, his gaze still fixed on the photograph. He never asked for any payment. I owed him a debt. Then you appeared in that alley. Same eyes, same courage. I thought fate was playing tricks on me. You think saving your life makes me yours? No, he said, his voice barely audible. It makes you sacred. Something inside her twisted, a confusing mix of fear, uncertainty, and something warmer that she didn't want to acknowledge. You can't keep me here. I can keep you alive. That night, the city outside burned with a palpable tension. Tucker had vanished from the local hospitals and resurfaced online, angry, wounded, and vowing revenge on anyone who had crossed him. Rumors began to circulate about a bounty $50,000 for the girl who'd ruined him. Salvador's men intercepted encrypted messages and surreptitious photos of her apartment, and even her sister's dorm room. And suddenly, Nova understood the gravity of her situation. She wasn't just collateral damage anymore. She was the reason for an escalating war. Salvador stood by the window, his phone pressed tightly to his ear, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He's putting a price on her head. Double the guards. No one gets near the Harris girls. When he finally hung up the phone, she asked him quietly, What about me? You stay here, he said, his voice firm and unwavering. Until it's done. And then he met her gaze directly, and she saw something raw and untamed flickering behind his carefully cultivated calm. Then you decide if you still want to run. Outside, the city skyline was bathed in a golden light beneath the approaching dawn. Inside, Two people who should have remained strangers stood together in the soft aftermath of violence, both silently realizing that survival wasn't necessarily the same as freedom. The storm broke over the city like a long-delayed confession. Rain streaked down the glass walls of the Pomo Tower while Nova stood barefoot in the war room, watching flashes of lightning paint the Manhattan skyline in brief, ghostly white strokes. Behind her, the multiple screens glowed with live feeds, monitoring cars, docks, and warehouses. Every sudden movement could be Tucker. Every shadow a potential threat. Salvador entered the room without a sound. He carried his exhaustion like a second skin, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his jaw tight, exuding the strained calm of a man who'd spent years meticulously controlling chaos and was finally reaching the end of his leash. "You haven't slept," Nova observed quietly. "Neither have you. I don't have guards posted outside my door to keep me from leaving. You do now." He poured 2 drinks, carefully placing one in her hand. "Tucker's people are circling. I can't risk you walking into a crossfire." Her laugh was sharp and humorless. "You mean you can't risk losing control?" His eyes met hers, tired, dark, and unflinching. "Maybe both." 3 days passed in an uneasy, fragile quiet. The news cycles blurred together, but the relentless war never stopped. Tucker had money, powerful contacts, and a burning desperation fueling his actions. Salvador, on the other hand, had precision and meticulously gathered intelligence. Their escalating conflict turned the city's shadowy underbelly into a dangerous chessboard. Warehouse fires seized shipments, missing couriers, and through it all, Nova waited, trapped in the middle. She'd grown up believing that medicine could fix anything, if you just worked fast enough and cared deeply enough. But there was no medical textbook for this. No dosage for the crippling guilt she felt. No effective treatment for a man like Salvador Pomo, who seemed to love by conquering and controlling. On the 4th morning, Luca burst into the room, brandishing a tablet. "They have Ava." Nova froze, her blood turning to ice. "Dorm security footage," Luca said, his voice clipped and urgent. Tucker's crew grabbed her right outside the library. Message came through on a burner phone. "Midnight trade. He wants Nova delivered to him." Silence swallowed the entire room. Salvador's voice, when it finally came, was as cold and sharp as shattered ice. "Assemble everyone. I'll handle him personally." Nova stepped forward, her voice firm. "No guns." He turned to face her, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "He took your sister, and you'll get her killed if you storm in there shooting. You think I can negotiate with a man like Tucker? You taught me there's always another move," she said, her gaze unwavering. Luca looked back and forth between them, wisely remaining silent. Salvador exhaled, the sound raw with contained fury. "What are you suggesting?" "I go," Nova said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He wants me, not you. Let him think he's won. You stay close enough to end it if I fail." Salvador shook his head slowly, his jaw tight with barely controlled rage. "You're not bait." "I'm already bait," she said softly, her eyes locking with his. "At least this way it's on my terms." He stared at her for a long moment, and something deep inside him seemed to break the illusion that he could keep her untouched and safe. "You wear a vest," he said finally, his voice strained. "You stay within my sight. Deal?" The warehouse on the riverfront was a vast cathedral of rust and echoes. Midnight fog rolled through the broken windows, carrying the distinct smell of oil and rain. Tucker waited in the center of the cavernous space, his bandaged arm a visible trophy of rage. Ava knelt nearby, her wrists bound with zip ties, her spirit defiant even in the face of fear. When Nova stepped inside, Tucker's grin cut through the darkness like a jagged knife. Well, the good doctor's pet has finally learned obedience." Her voice was surprisingly calm. "You wanted me. I'm here. Let her go." He chuckled humorlessly. "You'll forgive me if I doubt your sincerity. Strip off the wire, sweetheart." "There isn't one." "Liar." He snapped his fingers. 2 large men approached her, frisking her roughly. They found nothing except the faint outline of body armor beneath her clothes and a small medical pouch at her belt. "What's this?" one of the men demanded, his voice rough. "First aid," she said, her voice unwavering. "For when this goes wrong." Tucker laughed cruelly and shoved the pouch aside. Still the saint. He stepped closer to her until she could smell the stale liquor on his breath. "Tell me, does your boyfriend know how you begged last time?" Nova met his gaze evenly, refusing to flinch. "I don't beg." "Then maybe I'll teach you." A light blinked red in the corner of her vision. One of Salvador's drones, invisible to everyone but her. A whisper crackled in her earbud. "I have you. 30 seconds. She forced her breathing to remain steady. "Let her go first," Nova said, her voice clear and unwavering. "You get what you came for after." Tucker smirked. "I don't negotiate with—" The lights suddenly died, plunging the warehouse into darkness. Gunfire ripped through the silence. Muzzle flashes strobed across the walls, white lightning in a deafening storm of steel. Nova hit the ground, instinctively dragging Ava beneath a sturdy metal table. Bullets shredded the air above them. Then, an eerie silence fell as the emergency lights flickered back on. Pomo's men filled the room, their weapons trained on the remaining members of Tucker's crew, who lay disarmed on the floor. Tucker himself crawled desperately toward a dropped pistol, bleeding from a wound in his leg. Salvador stepped from the shadows, his expression calm as midnight. "Tucker," he said quietly, his voice dangerously soft. "You had 3 chances. You think killing me fixes her?" Tucker spat a mouthful of blood onto the floor. "You'll never own her." "I don't want to own her," Salvador said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I want her free." He raised his gun, taking aim. Nova moved first, her hand closing around his arm, her voice sharp. "Don't, please." For a split second, Salvador didn't breathe. Then he slowly lowered the gun. "Your mercy, not mine," he murmured, his gaze fixed on her face. He turned to Luca. "Get them out of here." By dawn, Tucker was safely in federal custody. Thanks to the incriminating files Nova had forced Salvador to leak through anonymous channels. Every crime, every shell company, every illegal weapon deal was now meticulously tied to his name. No bullets, just overwhelming evidence. The news quickly labeled him the broker of blood. The city finally exhaled a collective sigh of relief. Nova stood on Salvador's balcony, her hair tangled by the wind. For the first time in months, there was no fear in her chest, just a bone-deep exhaustion and something heavier that she didn't want to identify. Salvador joined her quietly. He wasn't wearing his usual suit tonight, just a simple shirt, the sleeves rolled up, revealing the pale scar she'd stitched 6 months ago, now barely visible under the moonlight. "You kept your promise," she said softly, breaking the silence. "I said I'd keep you alive. And my sister already on a flight to D.C. New identity, full scholarship. My gift." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "You can't keep paying my debts." "It's not debt," he said, his voice low and intense. "It's gratitude." "No," she whispered, stepping closer to him. "It's love disguised as guilt." He smiled then, the kind of tired smile that broke open something deep inside her. "And if it is, then stop disguising it." The distance between them vanished in an instant. His hands framed her face with a reverence that felt like love, not possession. Their first kiss was quiet and tentative. No fireworks, no triumphant victory, just 2 people who'd bled through far too much, finally finding something that felt like peace. When they finally broke apart, Nova rested her forehead against his chest. "I'm still going back to medicine." "I know. And you're still a criminal. Working on it. You'll fail." "Probably," she laughed softly. "Then we're both hopeless." "Maybe hope was never the point," he murmured, his voice low and rough. "Maybe survival was. And maybe this," he touched her heart lightly, "is what comes after." Weeks passed. The world quickly forgot the sensational headlines. The Pomo name retreated back into the realm of rumor and speculation. Nova returned to the hospital, late nights under harsh fluorescent lights, healing strangers who would never know how close she'd come to losing herself. Sometimes, when she walked home late at night, a black car idled quietly at the corner of the street. No driver was visible, just a silent, watchful presence ensuring that the darkness remained harmless. She never asked him to stop, and every Sunday morning, she would find a single white orchid waiting on her doorstep, the same flower that had perfumed the air at the gala where everything had begun. No note, no signature, just a silent reminder that love doesn't always ask permission. Sometimes, it simply stands guard in the shadows, patiently waiting until you're finally ready to see it.